In just 46 seconds, Donald Trump pointed at Jasmine Crockett on live national TV and ordered her to be removed from Congress. But Jasmine Crockett didn't twitch. She stood like stone. Then with surgical calm, she pulled out a creased envelope, blood red stamped, and slowly unfolded a letter, one line carved in thick black ink. "She's a problem. Handle it." Gasps cracked through the chamber. A nation forgot how to breathe. What was in that letter? That made Donald Trump turn white as a sheet on live TV. The red tally light blinked once and then locked on. C-SPAN, CNN, MSNBC, Fox. Every major network had a camera rolling. Room 214 of the Rayburn House office building was live raw, uncensored and simmering like a sealed pressure chamber. The nameplate read, Committee on Oversight and Accountability, but the energy inside suggested something far more combustible. The kind of room where the wrong question could ignite a national wildfire. Donald J. Trump entered precisely at 12:43 p.m., flanked by 4 lawyers, 1 ex-Secret Service agent, and a PR handler who wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. He was dressed not like a witness, but like a returning King Navy suit, crimson tie, gold cufflinks shaped like eagles. He smiled like the cameras owed him something. Even seated, he looked like he was ready to stand and command the room the second things didn't go his way. 12 feet across the room sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. No entourage, no stylist. Just a navy blue suit that fit like resolve. Her hair pulled tight. No jewelry except a simple silver pin that read TX30. Her eyes didn't flicker, didn't blink. They studied Trump the way a prosecutor studies a liar's breathing pattern, searching for the tell that unravels everything. She hadn't spoken yet. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. I came prepared to end a lie, not to survive one. The room wasn't quiet, it was hushed. There's a difference. Quiet is peace. Hushed is tension pretending not to breathe. Staffers shuffled papers too softly. Journalists texted with trembling thumbs. Even the marble underfoot seemed to resist echoing. There was something claustrophobic about room 214 that afternoon, as if everyone knew something irreversible was about to happen, but no one knew who would strike the first match. Chairman Mike Johnson cleared his throat. A signal, a countdown. Today's proceedings, he began, will focus on the integrity of financial disclosures, campaign-related PACs, and potential conflicts of interest involving former federal officials. Everyone knew what that meant. This wasn't about policy, this was about Trump. And from the way he crossed his legs and leaned back in his leather chair, he knew it too. The first 2 speakers were procedural, boring by design, but beneath the monotony glances flicked back and forth like silent Morse code. Trump whispered something to his lawyer who smirked and nodded. Jasmine didn't move. She sat statue still until the clock on the wall flipped to 12:46. That's when she opened the folder. Not dramatically, not like a showman, like a surgeon unwrapping a scalpel. She didn't even look at it. She already knew what was inside. The room didn't realize it yet, but that motion, the unsealing of a simple envelope, was the detonation. Somewhere 3 rows back, a journalist inhaled too sharply. Trump's eyes narrowed. His cufflink clicked against the chair arm as his fingers tightened. There was no gavel, no raised voice, no announcement. But every camera zoomed in by instinct. Because when Jasmine Crockett opened that envelope, America braced itself for impact. What could be in a letter so ordinary-looking that even the marble walls seemed to lean in to hear it crack open? Trump leaned forward slowly, elbows pressing into the mahogany desk as if he were ready to deliver a sermon. His voice dropped, measured, disdainful, heavy, with the tone of a man used to snapping fingers and watching rooms obey. This woman, he said, nodding toward Jasmine without fully looking at her, has made it her mission to sow division in this country. She's not here for oversight, she's here to grandstand. A problem for America. No one moved, not even the stenographer's fingers. Jasmine didn't blink. She waited, letting the weight of his accusation settle like dust across the room. Then, without raising her voice, she asked a question that sliced through the silence like glass. Mr. Trump, can you explain why $8 million was funneled from a shell corporation in Cyprus into your affiliated pass 6 weeks before the Georgia runoff? There it was, the match. Lit. Trump recoiled, not in fear, but in fury. He glanced left, right, then forward, eyes flashing like high beams in a tunnel. He didn't answer. He didn't argue. He reached for the microphone in front of him, still hot, still live on every national broadcast, and said 3 words that detonated the room. Get her out. A pause. a collective inhale. Then he added louder, angrier, as if trying to reclaim control through volume now. His voice ricocheted off the marble walls sharp enough to cut. Chairs scraped. One Capitol officer hesitated by the side door. A second leaned forward from the back wall. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't shift. Her back stayed straight, her eyes locked on Trump's face, not with fear, but with something colder, something final. The cameras didn't cut away. There were no commercial breaks. America heard every syllable. Trump turned toward the chairman. She's out of order. She's inciting lies based on fabricated documents. His hands trembled, not with panic, but rage dressed as indignation. Jasmine moved finally, not to rise, not to protest. She reached down into her leather briefcase slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a manila envelope, creased at the corner. Blood-red stamp across the seal. She set it on the desk in front of her and gently tapped it once, as if it were ticking. A whisper from the press bench. "What is that?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The envelope itself answered everything. Trump's jaw tensed. He tilted forward in his chair, eyes narrowing, as if trying to read the contents through the paper. Jasmine met his gaze for the first time and said just 4 words. Quiet, clear, surgical. "You wrote this, didn't you?" The chamber froze. Even the air held still. In that moment, the balance of power didn't just shift, it fractured. Trump had tried to silence her with force. Jasmine responded with something infinitely more dangerous: documentation. As 2 Capitol officers stepped forward, Jasmine pushed the envelope an inch closer to her microphone. The red stamp caught the overhead light briefly, blindingly, like a wound begging to be opened. Trump's voice came again, this time unsteady. "This is a hoax. This is nonsense." Jasmine didn't look at him now. She looked at the American people through the lens of the cameras and said, "You wanted me out. But maybe the letter inside this envelope is what finally gets you out." And just like that, a nation leaned closer to its screens because the real hearing had just begun. What line could be so damning that a former president tried to erase the person holding it live on air? The envelope lay flat on the desk like a silent threat. Jasmine Crockett moved slowly, deliberately breaking the red-stamped seal with the precision of someone who had waited years for this moment. No theatrics, just calm surgical intent. Like a surgeon unwrapping a truth no one else dared to touch. Capitol officers froze mid-step. Aides stopped scribbling. Chairman Mike Johnson blinked but said nothing. Even the chamber air felt tighter, like the walls themselves had leaned in to listen. Across America, living rooms filled with static silence. Jasmine unfolded a single sheet of ivory paper. The edges were curved, slightly worn, but the handwriting was bold. Ink-stroked letters carved with pressure, slanted forward with aggression. She lifted it and placed it into the overhead document camera. The monitors flared to life. Every screen in the room, every broadcast across the country, now displayed one page. In the top left corner, February 19th, 2024. Top right, a faint watermark from Mar-a-Lago stationery. Centered just above the bottom fold, a chilling sentence underlined twice. "She's a problem. Handle it." Signed beneath that, with unmistakable loops and flair. DT. The cameras shifted to Trump. No one told them to. They just did. He didn't move, but something shifted barely. The blood drained from his face, and for 8 full seconds he sat frozen. It was long enough for the whole country to realize something had just gone terribly wrong. Jasmine kept her eyes on the page. Her voice, when it came, was controlled and cold. "This letter was delivered anonymously to my office 3 weeks ago. Independent forensic testing confirms the ink is less than 6 months old, and the signature matches 6 authenticated White House correspondences, down to pressure point analysis on the capital letters." Trump's attorney leapt up, shouting objections, words like a fabricated, unverified political stunt, but the room wasn't listening. The truth was no longer confined to legal language. It was printed, enlarged, and burned into the eyes of millions. Jasmine finally looked at Trump. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You tried to erase me with an order, but I brought something harder to erase." Trump shifted in his seat, muttering, "That's not mine. This is fake. Another hit job." But his voice cracked. It stumbled over syllables like a man searching for ground he no longer stood on. She lifted the page again, this time, holding it high enough for the gallery to see. "If that is not your handwriting, Mr. Trump," she said, "then why is the ink still fresh?" No one spoke. Not even the reporters. For one breathless moment, the entire nation sat at the edge of its seat, not waiting for answers, but for the fallout. When truth is written in ink and signed with intent, how do you deny it when the whole world is watching it unfold? No one in room 214 moved. The letter still hovered on the monitors, locked under the stark glare of the document camera. Every line of ink glared back like a fingerprint in public view. Jasmine Crockett sat steady, hands folded, letting the silence marinate. It wasn't just a pause, it was a test. Who would dare speak next? The answer came from the most unexpected corner. "I've seen that handwriting before," came a voice from the side bench, calm, southern, unmistakably certain. All eyes turned to the witness gallery. It was Eleanor Finch, 71 years old, former senior White House correspondence officer under both Republican and Democratic administrations. She had handled everything from condolence letters to declarations of war. For 22 years, she was the final gatekeeper between a president's pen and the public. She stood with effort, but without hesitation. Her eyes locked on the screen. "That's his," she said. "No doubt about it. The pressure on the capital S, the tail of the T, it's him." Trump didn't look her way, his jaw tense, knuckles white against the leather armrest. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She stepped forward and placed a printed comparison beside the document camera, a verified Trump signature from 2019, certified by the National Archives. Identical strokes, identical aggression. Chairman Johnson cleared his throat. "For the record, Ms. Finch, you're prepared to testify under oath." She nodded. "I don't need an oath to tell the truth. But yes, I am." The room shifted. The energy wasn't speculative anymore, it was certifying. Cameras caught every angle. Staffers whispered into phones. Outside producers at every network scrambled to place graphic overlays. But nothing could keep pace with the internet. By the time the chairman gabbled twice to restore order, the hashtag was already trending. "Handle it letter." 4 million posts in 17 minutes. Clips of Jasmine's question. Screenshots of the letter. Split screens comparing signatures like crime scene reconstructions. Someone online even paired the line, "She's a problem." "Handle it," with images of other women Trump had publicly insulted. The narrative was no longer just about Jasmine, it was about every voice he had tried to silence. Inside the chamber, Jasmine hadn't moved, but her silence was no longer passive, it was strategic. She was letting the room implode under its own weight. Trump finally leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something, but the mic picked it up. "They're not supposed to have that." The room heard it. So did every viewer at home. Jasmine finally spoke, eyes still on the letter. "Not supposed to, but we do." Then she looked at Eleanor, nodded once, and turned back to the monitors. "Truth has a strange way of showing up," she said, "especially when it's written in your own hand." And just like that, the chamber wasn't debating anymore. It was reckoning. How do you deny what's written in ink? When the whole country has already read between the lines, the chamber had barely recovered from Eleanor Finch's testimony when the screen behind the dais flickered to life. The broadcast didn't announce her. She didn't need it. The second her face appeared composed, razor sharp, framed by the seal of New York's Attorney General's office room, 214 fell into complete stillness. Letitia James didn't wait for permission to speak. "For the record," she began, her voice clipped and clear, "that letter was authenticated by my office 7 weeks ago. Ink analysis confirms it originated between February 14th and 21. Handwriting matches 3 separate White House correspondences from Donald Trump during his post-presidency period. And yes, he signed it." Gasps rippled across the room. Chairman Johnson hesitated, then leaned forward into his mic. "Madam Attorney General, are you stating that your office conducted a private investigation into this document?" Letitia didn't blink. "We were conducting a broader inquiry into irregular campaign PC activity connected to foreign entities. The letter was submitted anonymously, attached to a confidential witness deposition. We verified its legitimacy, but political pressure prevented us from disclosing it." Her final words hung in the air like gunpowder. Political pressure. The meaning was clear. Someone somewhere high had buried the evidence, and Jasmine Crockett had just exhumed it live on national television. Trump sat back in his chair, arms crossed, visibly seething. "This is absurd," he snapped. "This is just another one of those witch hunts. A hoax wrapped in legal theater. Classic Letitia, classic Crockett. Manufactured lies from angry women who hate this country." He said it slowly, "angry women," and let the insult hang. The reaction was instant. Jasmine didn't flinch. Letitia didn't even blink. Instead, she smiled. "I may be angry, Mr. Trump," she said through the monitor, "but my facts are calm. My evidence doesn't shout. And the last time I brought something to court, it cost your company over $350 million. Trump shifted in his seat, a crack in the performance. The chairman cleared his throat again, clearly unnerved. "Are you prepared to submit your office's authentication as part of the congressional record?" Letitia nodded. "Already done. Your staff should be receiving the file transfer as we speak." On cue, an aide entered from the back of the room and handed the chairman a USB drive inside a sealed DOJ envelope. Jasmine finally broke her silence. "So to recap," she said, locking eyes with Trump, "I was ordered out of this chamber for asking about money. But now we have a signed letter authenticated by a state attorney general containing a direct threat against a sitting member of Congress." She leaned forward slightly. "Still think this is theater?" Trump leaned toward his mic, sneering. "You've always been the drama, Crockett. You and your crew of radical liars. This isn't oversight. This is a show trial, a setup." He leaned back smug, but Letitia's voice came through the speaker one last time, measured final. "Then tell me, Mr. Trump, why did your ink match?" And in that moment, even the floorboards of room 214 seemed to hold their breath. When the truth is verified, stamped and delivered, what's left for a liar to hide behind? The air in room 214 had turned heavy like static before a lightning strike. With the letter now authenticated, the signature matched, and Letitia James confirming its origin, the hearing was no longer a political spectacle. It was a live threat assessment. Something ancient stirred in the room: fear. Not fear of losing votes, but of what might happen next if this truth was allowed to keep breathing. And Jamie Raskin, ever the realist, felt it before anyone else. He leaned forward into his mic, his brow furrowed with concern. "Madam Chair," he began, "given the nature of the threats made and the sudden emergence of state-level criminal evidence, I move that we adjourn this hearing for the safety of Congresswoman Crockett and the integrity of this body." It wasn't performative. Raskin had lived through January 6th. He'd seen what incitement looked like, and this felt like the kindling all over again. The room stirred, unsure whether to agree or brace. Jasmine stood slowly, not rushed, not rattled, just rising like something inevitable. Her hands were calm, her voice clear. "I respect Congressman Raskin more than words can say," she began, turning toward him with a small nod. "But I didn't come here to be shielded. I came here to speak." She turned her full attention to the chamber, to the cameras, to the millions of eyes she could feel pressing through the lens. "If I leave," she said, "the truth leaves with me." She let it hang there, sharp as glass. "So I'm staying." The impact of her words was seismic, not loud, but deep, like something settling in the bones. Trump scoffed from across the table, loud enough for every mic to catch. "Spare us the performance," he muttered. "This is what she does, turns every moment into a stage." Jasmine didn't turn to him. She didn't need to. "I'm not performing," she said evenly. "I'm surviving, and I'm doing it in front of the very man who wrote a sentence about me like I was a problem to be erased." She stepped toward the center of the room, now framed by marble and fire. Her voice was steady, not defiant, but prophetic. "They're watching Mr. Trump. People in Akron and Queens and Jackson, Mississippi. Women who've been called angry staffers who've been told to smile more. Citizens who've been told to sit down. They're watching now." She turned, eyes sweeping the rows like floodlights. "And they're not blinking." Raskin held her gaze for a moment. Then he leaned back, folded his hands, and said softly, "The floor is yours, Congresswoman." A nod of trust. A passing of the torch. Jasmine turned to the chamber and lowered her voice. "And you might want to stay too," she said, her tone now a whisper the whole room leaned into. "Because what comes next might involve you." There was no motion, no gavel, no sound. Just the pulse of a nation realizing it wasn't watching a hearing anymore. It was watching history choose sides. When truth dares to speak in a room built to silence, it will you stay and listen. Jasmine didn't waste a second. As the chamber held its breath in the silence she left behind, she stepped back to her seat, tapped twice on her tablet, and the room lit up. A massive screen behind the dais came to life, filled edge to edge with a high-resolution bank transaction record. Black lines of data highlighted routes and red arrows tracing the path of $8 million. The hearing room was no longer just political theater. It had become a forensic crime scene. This, Jasmine said, pointing to the first note on the flowchart, is the Trump-affiliated passee registered in Delaware. From here, the funds move quietly and visibly to a shell company in the Bahamas with no listed employees. Her voice remained calm, but the material she unleashed hit like gunshots. Then to a second firm in the Seychelles, and finally into an account held by a private bank in Dubai. No taxes, no disclosures, no oversight. The screen zoomed in as she spoke. Line by line, each transaction lit up in sequence, dated, coded, traceable. The movement was fast, less than 48 hours between all three steps. "This isn't donation mismanagement," she said. "This is engineered laundering." A murmur rolled through the room, soft but unmistakable. Trump shifted in his chair, arms crossed. "That's not mine," he barked. "Anyone can draw lines and throw names on a screen. This is another fiction built by people who hate success." But his tone lacked its usual bombast. It cracked at the edges. He looked not defiant but cornered. Jasmine didn't respond to him. She turned to the screen again and clicked to reveal the fourth page, an internal ledger marked Private Reserve, Project Crimson. The room tilted. That term hadn't appeared in any filing before. She let the phrase sit there. Two Capitol staffers exchanged glances. One gasped. This project, she continued, was flagged by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network 2 months ago. Until today, it had no confirmed political affiliation. But this account linked to the final deposit in Dubai shares a routing number with, she tapped again, a company tied directly to Trump International Ventures. A new image appeared in account summary with the name of a Dubai-based holding company. Below it, a signature D. Trump Jr. The gallery erupted in whispers. Fox analysts in the back of the room sat bolt upright. Trump leaned forward, voice rising. "I've never seen that company. I don't know what she's talking about. This is manipulated. It's lies, all of it." But no one was shouting him down. He was shouting into space. Jasmine stood still, letting the evidence speak. Then she looked at the chairman. "The paper trail doesn't just exist, it's pristine. And when money runs in silence, it tells you who thinks they'll never be heard." She turned back to the room. And now they've been heard. The screen faded to black, but no one looked away. Because what they'd just seen wasn't a theory, it was a blueprint. If money could move across oceans in less than 2 days, how long had the silence been paid for? And who else was cashing in? The screen on the wall snapped to a new slide, simple, sterile, and devastating. A corporate registry page appeared, pulled from an international database listing the recipient of the Dubai transfer. One company name. 0 board members, 0 employees. A registered address that, when searched on Google Maps, showed nothing but a rusted mailbox in an alley behind a convenience store in Nassau. Jasmine's voice was quieter, now colder. "This is the entity that received the final $8 million. She circled the box labeled Global Endeavor Holdings. A company with no staff, no building, no tax filings, just a bank account and a mission." The words hit harder without volume, because the data was clean, surgical, impossible to deny. "Shell company," someone whispered from the gallery. The phrase carried like a ripple across the chamber. Jasmine let it settle before continuing. "It exists for one reason: to move money in the dark without fingerprints." She paused. "Until now." From the second row, a man stood, gray, blazer-soft voice, but eyes sharp with decades of experience. His name was Russell Knox, a senior financial auditor with the Government Accountability Office. He raised his hand, but Jasmine had already called his name. This wasn't improvisation. This was precision. "I was assigned to review irregular financial transfers linked to overseas political PACs," Knox said, approaching the front. "This company was flagged within 20 seconds of cross-referencing routing codes." He tapped the screen, highlighting the final transaction. No payroll, no board, just a digital vault that existed long enough to receive, redirect, and disappear. Trump snapped. "Fake data. You people are obsessed with me. You create fantasy spreadsheets and then call it truth." He slammed his hand on the desk. "This is your sick revenge tour because I didn't play your Washington games." His voice boomed, but his words landed flat. The room didn't flinch, because shouting doesn't erase evidence. It only echoes louder against facts that don't move. Russell remained steady. "We pulled IP logs, timestamp records, server location trails. The money moved in under 46 minutes. He looked at Jasmine, then at Trump. This wasn't just hidden, it was rehearsed. The screen changed again. A login record appeared. Time zone Eastern Standard. Location tag Palm Beach, Florida. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply let the room see it. "This is what accountability looks like," she said. "Not rumors, not opinion. Data, pure and traceable." Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "You can deny the headline. You can mock the messenger, but you can't erase the math. Trump laughed, short, sharp, hollow. What's next? You gonna blame me for the stock market too? Jasmine didn't respond. The numbers were doing it for her. And somewhere in the quiet, as the last slide faded to black, someone in the chamber whispered what the country was already thinking. If this company didn't exist, then what did they need it to hide? And how many others were still out there invisible and waiting to be exposed? The screen went dark, but the damage was done. The paper trail was complete. The company didn't exist, but the consequences had. Jasmine stepped back, not to retreat, but to let the weight of truth settle across every wall, every rib cage in that chamber. No one moved. Even the oxygen in room 214 seemed reluctant to circulate. Then from the third row of the public gallery, a sound broke the silence, wet, cracked human. A woman, maybe mid-60s, stood up with trembling hands. Her body shook, not from nerves, but from something older. Grief. My husband, she said, voice ragged, died in our living room. It took 6 days because we couldn't afford the ambulance. Her voice wavered but didn't fall. He lost his Medicaid when the federal expansion got pulled. We used to watch these hearings together. Now I'm watching it alone. The room froze. Cameras turned. Even the Capitol officers paused in place. She took a breath and looked down at Jasmine. I don't know what a PAC is. I don't know what a shell company does. But I know what it feels like when someone rich signs a paper and someone poor disappears. Trump turned his head away. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply lifted her hand and held it out toward the woman, open, steady, without words. That one gesture was louder than any monologue. The widow covered her mouth and sobbed into it, and the chamber, this marble box built to contain power, fell silent. Not out of obligation, out of guilt. Journalists lowered their cameras. Staffers stopped typing. No one in that room, not even Trump, had a line ready for this, because data might be denied, documents might be deflected. But grief, real grief, doesn't blink under pressure, it bleeds. Jasmine turned back toward the chairman without ever dropping her hand. Power signs the order, she said quietly, but silence does the rest. She turned her eyes to the row of Piazzi documents, still visible on the smaller monitors. Pages and pages of movement money traveling in shadows while people like that woman's husband were dying in plain sight. And then she looked up to the cameras. Not just to speak, but to indict. How many more families, she asked, were handled quietly? While the cameras pointed elsewhere, no one had an answer. Because deep down they all knew this wasn't just about one transfer, one company, one letter. It was about all the names that never made it to a hearing. All the people who didn't get to speak. And as Jasmine sat back down, the cameras didn't pan to Trump. They stayed on the widow, because that's where the real evidence was. What if the biggest scandal wasn't the money that moved, but the lives that didn't? The widow had barely returned to her seat when another presence shifted the air in room 214. A low murmur spread across the gallery, quick, electric, unmistakable. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had entered the chamber. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Wearing black from head to toe, she moved with precision down the central aisle, bypassing press aides and stunned staffers. Her eyes locked on Jasmine Crockett. No nod, no whispered coordination. Just one step forward, and then another until she stood shoulder to shoulder beside her. Two women, two stories, one wall of defiance. The cameras snapped to wide angle. Every major network adjusted their frames. Suddenly, the image that filled America's screens wasn't a man in power. It was two women who'd survived everything he tried to erase. Jasmine with her evidence, AOC with her voice, neither blinking. Chairman Johnson tried to regain control, tapping his mic twice. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, he began, you were not scheduled to appear before this committee. His tone was clipped, but his posture had changed, like he knew whatever script he held was about to burn. AOC turned calmly. I'm not here to testify. I'm here to support the Congresswoman from Texas in submitting further evidence. Since some members of this body seem determined to ignore the ones already screaming at us in plain sight. Trump scoffed audibly. Perfect, he muttered. A socialist tag team. What's next? You gonna hand out food stamps and cry on cue? Jasmine said nothing, but AOC smiled. A slow, calculated smile. I've cried before, Mr. Trump, she said, usually while watching my constituents bury loved ones because your policies bled their wallets dry. Her voice didn't rise, it carved. But today, I'm not crying. I'm documenting. She handed Jasmine a folder. a sealed document packet marked with the emblem of the New York Bureau of Financial Enforcement. Jasmine opened it, pulled a page free, and placed it on the overhead scanner. The image on screen was brutal. A wire transfer order signed by a PSC executive now facing federal indictment directly connecting the shell company to an arm of Trump International Ventures. Gasps again. Louder this time. A pattern was forming, and with every page the lines grew thicker between scandal and strategy. AOC stepped closer to the mic. This committee is not just a stage, it is a mirror, and if we don't show the people what's in that mirror, then we are not representatives. We are accomplices. Trump leaned back, eyes narrowed, grinding his jaw. But the visual was already viral, two women of color standing tall, refusing to move. It was more than a headline. It was a shift. Jasmine turned to her colleague, eyes sharp. Let's keep going. And without fanfare, they did. Because this wasn't just about truth anymore. It was about who had the spine to tell it, while the man who once owned the room tried not to disappear in it. What happens when the most powerful person in the room is no longer the loudest? The folder AOC had handed over was just the beginning. Jasmine's fingers moved deliberately now, reaching down into her briefcase, not for another envelope, but for something heavier. A thick black binder sealed in red, its cover stamped with a line that sent a chill through the room the moment it hit the desk. Confidential. OIG. Office of the Inspector General. The chamber tightened. Even Chairman Johnson leaned forward, squinting to read the label. Jasmine didn't look up. She opened the binder to a bookmarked page and slid a copy under the document camera. The screen lit up with a government memo, top to bottom redacted, except for one crucial paragraph. It was a federal land transfer approval signed in blue ink by Donald J. Trump. The beneficiary, an agricultural front company based in South Dakota. The real owner, a nonprofit shell group with ties to a foreign political network. A group the FBI had flagged in 3 separate counterintelligence bulletins. And Trump had greenlit the sale personally. Jasmine turned to the room. This document was never made public. It was buried under the National Resources Privatization Initiative. But it's real, and it's verified. Before she could finish, Trump stood. Not eased back, not shifted. He stood. Chair legs scraped the marble. The cameras snapped to follow him. This is garbage, he barked, voice tight, with something no one had heard yet in his tone. Panic. You have no clearance for that document. You can't even say that out loud. This whole thing is illegal. Jasmine remained seated, binder still open. That's incorrect, she said evenly. Section 412B of the Oversight Mandate allows any member of Congress to present classified Inspector General findings in a closed hearing. She turned slowly to the press gallery, unless, of course, they're already being aired on public record. By accident. Laughter flickered across the crowd, but it died quickly, because Trump wasn't laughing. Trump turned to his lawyer. We're done. This is over. He shoved back his chair, the screech of metal legs cutting across the marble like a scream. As he turned to leave, the screen behind him, still connected to the oversight server, flashed red. A live vote tally appeared. Motion to compel active. A new bar loaded in real time. Names started flipping from gray to green. Then came the sound, 1 beep for each yes. Jasmine didn't speak yet. She didn't need to. Trump froze mid-step. The screen behind him now displayed in bold white subpoena order, passed. Return to seat immediately. The entire room turned toward him, not to debate, but to enforce. Then Jasmine spoke, her voice low and surgical. You don't get to walk out now, Mr. Trump. Congress just voted. You're not a guest anymore. You're a witness under order. Trump stopped, back turned frozen. She stood up slowly, binder still in one hand. You signed away protected land to a company flagged by federal counterintelligence, then tried to bury it. That's not a disagreement. That's national security. Trump turned halfway, eyes cold. You have no idea what you're playing with, he growled. Jasmine stepped toward him. No, she said. I know exactly what I'm holding. The question is, how many more pages do I have to turn before you remember what's written on them? Trump didn't respond. He just stood there, jaw tight, a man who had once run the world, now trying to remember how to outrun it. Because once the binder opened, there was no closing it. And if page 1 caused him to rise, what would page 10 make him do? How many secrets fit between 2 covers? Before the weight of them breaks the table, Trump's hand hovered over the exit door. 1 foot behind the threshold, the other still inside the fire, he started. Room 214 wasn't just watching him, it was measuring him. Cameras zoomed in, lips tightened, breaths held. The man who once commanded press pools with a single tweet was now shrinking under the weight of a single binder. Jasmine didn't chase. She didn't rush her words. She stood in the very center of the storm he created and let her voice cut through the static like a blade through fog. "You can walk out," she said calmly, "but this will follow you. Every court, every state, every voter." Trump stopped moving, not out of respect, out of instinct. She wasn't threatening him. She was narrating his future. Jasmine stepped forward, not with aggression, but with absolute certainty. "This binder, it's not just evidence. It's a mirror. And the worst part about a mirror, Mr. Trump, is that you don't get to control what reflects back." She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. Every word landed like a slow hammer. He turned halfway toward her face, tight eyes narrowed. "You think this is some kind of victory dance," he snapped. "You think this circus is going to matter 6 months from now?" She didn't flinch. "It won't take 6 months. The truth has already left this room, and it's louder than either of us now." Trump tried to speak again, but the words tangled in his mouth. For the first time, it looked like he didn't know who the audience was anymore. The room, the cameras, or himself. Jasmine kept going. "You built your empire on spectacle, but now the spectacle is watching you. You used to direct the cameras." She paused, eyes locked on his. "Now they follow me." The silence was surgical, deliberate. No one moved. "The cameras will follow me too, Mr. Trump," she said. "All the way to November." He didn't respond. Couldn't. Because deep down he knew it was already happening. The angles had shifted. The coverage had turned. And in that room on that day, the lights no longer belonged to him. Jasmine closed the binder. Slowly. Decisively. As if sealing a chapter the country had waited years to read. And still Trump didn't move. When a man who never stopped talking has nothing left to say, what's left of his power? What do you call the moment when the most feared voice in politics finally goes silent because someone dared to speak louder? Without shouting, the binder was closed, but the damage was just beginning to unfold. Before Trump could take another step toward the door, a new figure stood in the gallery. Quiet, measured, wearing no badge, no suit, just a black turtleneck and trembling resolve. Her name didn't need introduction. America had seen her face once, walking behind Trump in press photos, always silent, always one step behind. Her voice, when it finally came, trembled, but not from fear, from restraint. "My name is Elise Warren," she said. "I was a senior communications aide at Trump International Ventures until last October." Her eyes didn't flicker. She looked straight at Jasmine. "I brought something you'll want to hear." A flash drive passed from her hand to the clerk's. The chairman glanced toward Jasmine for a cue. She nodded once. The clerk inserted it into the room's master system. A dull hum buzzed from the speakers. Then a click. The recording began. A male voice, smooth, familiar, unmistakable. "She's trouble. You use whatever it takes. I don't want her in front of a mic again. Handle it quietly." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't frantic. It was cold, calculated, intimate. Then the second voice, unidentified, asked, "You mean politically or?" More aggressive, Trump's voice again. This time firmer. "Use your judgment." The audio ended. The silence it left behind did more damage than any word it contained. Jasmine didn't blink. Trump didn't breathe. Chairman Johnson leaned into his mic, stunned. "Ms. Warren, can you confirm when this recording was made?" Elise answered without hesitation. "March 12, 2024. I made it during a closed strategy meeting at Mar-a-Lago. He didn't know the recorder was active, but I kept it." Trump turned slowly, eyes burning into her. "You were in that room," he hissed. She nodded. "I was in a lot of rooms, Mr. Trump. You just never noticed the ones who weren't clapping." He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Jasmine stepped forward. "The voice on that tape," she said clearly, "has been analyzed by 3 independent forensic labs. University of Michigan Stanford's Audio Integrity Lab and the FBI's own voice recognition software." She clicked her remote, bringing up a single slide. A waveform comparison. Trump's confirmed voice, 98.7% match. She looked at him again. "Your signature was the first confirmation. Your voice is the second. The only thing left now is your confession." Trump slammed his hand on the table. "This is fake. You people fabricate everything. You'll do anything to destroy me." But his shouts didn't shake the room anymore. They just bounced off the evidence. Elise sat back down, tears in her eyes, but her spine unshaken. And Jasmine, still calm, leaned into her mic. Threats leave fingerprints, Mr. Trump, even when whispered. And now one whisper had become a roar. What if the most dangerous words aren't screamed in public, but murmured in rooms where no one was supposed to be listening? The tape had cracked open the floor beneath Donald Trump, but what came next would burn through the walls. As the last echo of his voice, "Use whatever it takes," faded from the speakers, a figure in the back of the press gallery stood. No spotlight found her. No microphone was waiting. But the room noticed. It always notices when someone stands with nothing but the truth and their own name. She walked forward with slow, deliberate steps. Gray coat, heavy boots, eyes tired but unshaken. The badge clipped to her collar read press, but not from a major network. Freepoint Investigations, a platform for journalists who'd long since given up on pleasing advertisers. Jasmine turned, immediately recognizing her. Naomi Estrada, one of the last reporters left in Washington, who still knocked on unlisted doors and refused to redact for comfort. A Capitol guard moved cautious. Naomi raised both hands. "I'm not here to disrupt," she said, "but I need the record to show why this tape exists and why it almost didn't." The chairman hesitated, then gestured to the mic. "Proceed." Naomi took the microphone like someone picking up a burden, not a weapon. "I've been sitting on that tape for 47 days. I received it from a whistleblower who feared retaliation, and after Elise Warren stepped forward today, I can confirm she was the source." Her voice was steady, clear. "But I didn't release it. Not because I doubted her, but because I was threatened." The room tightened. "I've covered war zones. I've crossed borders with trafficked children. But the only time I truly feared for my life was when I investigated Donald Trump's post-presidency financial operations." She paused, lifting her eyes to meet his. "And when I learned he said those words about Congresswoman Crockett, I knew what would happen if I pressed publish." She pulled a folded envelope from her coat pocket. "3 weeks ago, this was slid under my door. No return address. Inside was a photo of my family and a post-it note. Stories disappear. So can you." Gasps shot through the chamber. A senator cursed under his breath. Trump chuckled darkly from across the room. "Oh, please, this is pathetic. Everyone wants to be a hero now." Naomi turned to him calmly. "I don't need to be a hero, Mr. Trump. I just need to be what you fear most, a witness who writes things down." She turned back to the committee. "I waited. I hesitated. And then I watched Jasmine Crockett walk into this room and call your bluff with every camera pointed at her." Her voice cracked just slightly, but she didn't stop. "And I thought, if she's willing to stand in front of you with nothing but paper and a mic, then maybe I can do the same." Jasmine remained still behind her, not smiling, just listening. Naomi stepped forward and laid a second copy of the tape on the clerk's desk. "For the record, and for the ones who couldn't be here to speak." The room sat frozen, because what Naomi had just done wasn't journalism. It was war in lowercase letters, and it had just joined Jasmine's battle cry. What happens when silence breaks in stereo, once from a congresswoman's mic, and again from the voice of a woman who was supposed to stay quiet? Who else has been holding something back? For a long breath, no one moved. The tape had ended. Naomi had returned to her seat. Jasmine stood silent in the middle of it all, not claiming victory, just holding the weight of everything, said everything shown. Then slowly, as if summoned by something older than politics, the room began to rise. First a Democrat from Michigan, then a Republican from Ohio. One by one, across aisle lines and ideological fences, lawmakers stood. No statements, no grand gestures. Just quiet posture, like people who had finally heard enough. Even those who had come to dismiss her now couldn't look away. They weren't standing for party. They were standing for impact, for the truth they could no longer ignore, and for the woman who made them face it. Jasmine said nothing at first. She scanned the chamber, eyes unreadable, hands still at her sides. Then, with a calm so sharp it sliced through the room, she reached down and removed the small mic clipped to her lapel. She held it up, not like a weapon, but like a torch. "If I am a problem," she said, her voice steady, "I am proud to be one." Her words didn't echo, they sank. Deep, clean, direct. The kind of sentence no camera could soften, no spin could reframe. She turned her body slowly, addressing everyone, not just those in the chamber, but every living room behind every lens. If truth makes you uncomfortable, then maybe comfort was the wrong goal. A few heads dropped, a few eyes closed, but no one sat down. I didn't come here to perform, she continued. I came here because someone needed to say it. Out loud. On the record. Where no one could delete it. She took a step forward into the center of the room, as if drawing a line no one else had dared to cross. She glanced at Trump, still seated, unmoved, jaw tight, but said nothing to him directly. Her battle wasn't with the man anymore. It was with the silence that kept him powerful. The silence that had enabled everything he'd built. Jasmine held the mic tighter. I will wear the label they give me. Angry, loud, unreasonable. I've heard them all. She paused, letting the weight of each word settle. But if that's the cost of telling the truth, so be it. The room didn't erupt. It pulsed, like something had been set loose and no one could put it back in the box. Then she turned to the camera, speaking now, not to politicians, but to the people who had been waiting for someone to stand up for them. But the real problem, America, she said softly, is silence. She let the sentence breathe. Then, without raising her voice, she delivered the line that no one in that room or this country would forget. If I'm the problem, then maybe I'm exactly the answer we needed. The chamber didn't stir. The cameras didn't blink. Because in that moment, truth didn't shout. It just stood tall, unapologetic, unmovable, and undeniable. The morning after the hearing, Washington hadn't yet caught its breath, but the country already had. In cities, towns, trailer parks, and high-rise apartments, something was moving. Not outrage, not celebration. Something quieter, deeper. Recognition. The first letter arrived before sunrise. Handwritten. No return address. Just a trembling scrawl on yellow paper. You don't know me, it began, but I'm 83 years old and I've waited my whole life to hear someone speak like you. You are the voice I never had. By noon there were hundreds more. By evening, thousands. Some typed. Some scribbled. Some came with photographs of empty chairs. Fathers lost to policies, sisters silenced in courtrooms, sons deported with no warning. The postmarked cities stretched from Newark to Albuquerque, Flint, to rural Idaho. Different stories. One message. Thank you for not backing down. Inside Jasmine Crockett's office, the letters arrived in crates. Staffers stopped sorting and started reading. Tears blurred print. Veterans wrote about promises broken. Teachers enclosed copies of notes from students who had watched the hearing in class. One middle schooler from Chicago ended hers with, "You made me believe that truth isn't just something grown-ups pretend to care about." But it wasn't just paper. Across the country, phones buzzed with texts that read, "Did you see her?" Grocery stores played clips of the hearing on muted televisions behind checkout lanes. Barbershops in Atlanta rewound Jasmine's final mic drop again and again. In the Bronx, a mural began taking shape, spray-painted words above Jasmine's silhouette. She's a problem, and we're proud. In Montana, a retired rancher filmed himself burning his old campaign cap, saying, "I don't know who I voted for before, but I know who I'm listening to now." In Dallas, a church replaced their Sunday bulletin with excerpts from Jasmine's speech. And in a diner outside Tucson, a waitress refused to take off her apron until the last table watched the clip she'd played on her phone. The response didn't come from parties. It didn't need endorsements. It didn't wait for permission. Because when truth hits bone, the reaction isn't political, it's personal. Jasmine didn't issue a press release. She didn't post a victory reel. She sat in her office surrounded by stacks of open letters, reading silently. Her team watched as she reached for one envelope with trembling hands. It was sealed with wax. Inside, one sentence. "Don't let them make you small." She folded it once, slipped it into her coat pocket, and said nothing. Because the country had already spoken. Not with votes, not with applause, but with the quiet flood of voices that had waited years for someone who looked like them, sounded like them, fought like they never could, and didn't flinch. What happens when millions of unheard stories finally find a name to write on the envelope? And what if that name is yours? The letters kept coming, but so did something else. Darker, quieter, meant to crawl, not announce. It started with anonymous phone calls at night. No words, just breathing. Then came the packages unmarked, delivered without return address. Inside, burnt copies of Jasmine's testimony, scrawled with red marker. One note simply read, "Next time we won't miss." Capitol Police flagged it immediately. Within 48 hours, the FBI opened a formal investigation. Agents moved in quietly, reviewing security footage, tracking digital trails. Jasmine's office became a temporary safe zone monitored by federal protection teams. Cameras were installed, routes changed, panic buttons mounted under desks. But Jasmine never asked for the detail. When agents advised her to consider taking a leave of absence, she didn't flinch. They presented data a 71% spike in violent threats. They showed photos from online groups mapping her daily movements. They offered safety. She offered a question. If I sit down, she asked them, who stands up? No one answered, because they all knew what she meant. For every name that got printed on a threat list, there were 100 more that never got mentioned. Teachers, nurses, voters, survivors, people who didn't have bodyguards or microphones or law degrees, just lives they were trying to live out loud. Jasmine knew what silence cost. She'd buried too many stories to pretend retreat was noble. Outside her office, reporters waited for a statement. Staffers begged for one. Even her family called with worry in their voices. Her mother's voicemail was short, I want you alive more than I want you famous. But Jasmine didn't hold press conferences about the threats. She walked into every hearing room the same way she always did, heels, sharp eyes, forward silence loaded. She didn't speak of fear. She spoke of duty. And behind the scenes, the country noticed. Clips of her response went viral again. Her quote was painted on protest signs. Students in Philadelphia staged a walkout holding banners that read, if she won't sit, neither will we. In Georgia, a group of grandmothers held a candlelight vigil and read every threat aloud, turning intimidation into testimony. The fear was real, but so was the fire. And Jasmine knew something her enemies didn't. Every threat they sent her only sharpened the blade of her purpose. Every letter dipped in hate only reminded her who she was fighting for. So she showed up. Every day, every hearing, every room that tried to silence her. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's walking in with it anyway. And as she stood in front of that microphone again, same posture, same steel in her spine, the message wasn't loud. It was surgical. If they want me gone, she whispered to a staffer before stepping inside, they better bring more than fear. What do you do with someone who refuses to disappear? And what if that refusal becomes contagious? The final hearing didn't feel like the ones before it. There were no polished lobbyists, no think tank observers, no camera crews whispering about spin. Instead, the gallery was filled with the kind of Americans who rarely make it into these rooms, not as guests, but as stories never told. A school teacher from Detroit, a single father from Tulsa, a nurse from Baton Rouge who hadn't taken a day off in 18 months, a Vietnam veteran in a faded blue jacket, medals pinned beneath his heart. They sat shoulder to shoulder, no press passes, no agenda, just eyes wide open. Many had taken buses overnight, used vacation days they didn't have, left sick relatives behind because something had shifted and they wanted to see it with their own eyes. Jasmine Crockett hadn't invited them. She didn't need to. They came because they knew the hearing wasn't about Congress anymore. It was about who Congress actually answered to. The room buzzed with an energy more sacred than political worn hands, clutching notebooks, tired feet planted like they belonged. There were no name tags, only presence. The quiet kind that speaks louder than applause. Jasmine entered last, escorted not by security but by silence. She wore no armor, no new words. Just the same resolve that had withstood weeks of attacks, threats, smears. The kind of silence that builds its own gravity. Even the marble beneath her steps felt different. She took her seat slowly, adjusted the mic, and scanned the room. Not the panel, not the press, but the people. This chamber, she began, was never built for truth. It was built to look like it honors it. She paused. Let the weight land, but today it holds something real. Behind her, no flashbulbs popped. No journalists shouted questions. The country was watching, but from church basements, community centers, and break rooms, not from newsrooms. I've been called a problem, a distraction, a threat, she continued. But those labels were never about me. They were warnings for people like you. People who don't ask for power, but who deserve answers from those who hold it. No one stirred, no one interrupted. Congress doesn't belong to the powerful, she said slowly. It belongs to the people brave enough to demand answers. It wasn't a closing statement, it was a vow. And it struck with the kind of force no gavel could match. She stood up, leaving her notes behind. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled, not for the cameras, but for the nurse, the teacher, the father, the vet. The ones whose stories had filled her inbox, whose fear had filled her lungs, whose names would never be printed on headlines, but whose courage had filled the room. Outside agents still patrolled the perimeter. Her route was still under protection. The truth still needed bodyguards. But inside that chamber, something had changed, because the people had come in, and they weren't leaving. What kind of country do we become when the truth needs bodyguards? And what happens? When the people decide to stand guard themselves, he didn't return to room 214. He never would. Instead, Donald Trump chose a gilded ballroom at his Florida estate, flanked by flags and surrounded by loyalists. The walls were draped in red velvet, the podium gleamed, and the camera crews handpicked were told exactly where to stand. It wasn't a press conference. It was a performance. He walked out to thunderous applause, fists raised chin high. The smile was familiar, but the eyes weren't. They twitched beneath the stage lights, scanning the room not for support, but for control. He didn't wait long. This entire hearing was a disgrace, he said. A smear campaign orchestrated by radicals who hate this country. Jasmine Crockett is not a congresswoman. She's a traitor in a tailored suit. The crowd erupted, a mix of cheers and rehearsed outrage. He doubled down. She forged documents, weaponized fake recordings, and used race and gender to shield herself from accountability. What we witnessed wasn't oversight. It was sabotage. Plain and simple. Somewhere in the back, an aide flinched. The speech lasted 23 minutes. He never mentioned the evidence, never addressed the transfers, never acknowledged the voices that stood behind her. Instead, he leaned into fear, into denial, into the one tool he believed still worked: volume. But this time, the country didn't wait for late-night news cycles. Within hours, a clip from the hearing resurfaced, Jasmine standing alone with the mic in her hand, eyes locked on the camera. "If I am a problem, I am proud to be one." Posted without commentary. Just her words, just her voice. And the internet responded. 48 million views in 24 hours. The clip trended globally. Teachers played it in class. Protesters etched it on cardboard signs. A pastor in Atlanta played it at the end of his Sunday sermon, and the entire congregation stood. Networks that had once silenced her replayed the moment in full. No edits, no panels. Just the image of a woman who had stood her ground while a former president tried to bury the floor beneath her. Trump's video, in contrast, circulated in a different way, cut into reaction montages side by side with his voice on tape saying, "Use whatever it takes." His claims of forgery collapsed under the weight of authenticated records. His denial looked less like strength and more like something else: fear. Some say he knew it in that ballroom, that it hit him while the applause still rang, that the real headline wasn't about her being dangerous, it was about him being done. Because when a single voice pulls back the curtain, what's left behind isn't just a wounded ego, it's a nation watching the stage go dark. What happens when the man who never stopped talking finally says something, and no one believes him anymore? It wasn't televised. There were no cameras, no microphones, no dramatic lighting. Just a quiet vote held behind oak doors with the weight of a nation pressing in from every side. The House chamber wasn't packed, but it was full of tension, thick, heavy, undeniable. Everyone in that room knew this wasn't just another vote, it was a reckoning. The motion on the floor was clear: open a formal investigation into Donald J. Trump for financial misconduct, obstruction of oversight, and threats against the sitting member of Congress. Most expected it to fall along party lines. It always had before. But something had shifted since room 214. It started with a whisper, one Republican from Pennsylvania, then another from Arizona, then 5 more, 7 in total. 7 red votes turned blue, not in ideology, but in conscience. Not for politics, but for truth. The clerk called names, one by one. Voices echoed in the chamber, some proud, some broken. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett said nothing. She sat in the second row, still as stone. No notepad, no speech. Just her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the ceiling, like she was praying or remembering or both. She didn't look at the Republicans who flipped. She didn't need to. Their decision wasn't about her, it was about themselves. No one asked her to speak, and she didn't offer. Because some moments aren't made for microphones. They're made for silence so loud it can't be ignored. The speaker paused before reading the result. A delay no one questioned. Everyone already knew what it meant. Motion passed. Investigation approved. History made. Jasmine didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She didn't even smile. She just closed her eyes for a second, as if sealing the moment in her memory, then opened them again, steady and unblinking. Reporters outside scrambled for statements. Staffers whispered behind hands. Allies glanced toward her for a reaction. But Jasmine just sat still, unmoved by the storm she had survived and the storm she had now set into motion. Because it was never about the applause. It was about accountability. The 7 Republicans who crossed over didn't make eye contact. Not yet. But the room felt their weight, their shift, their quiet admission that maybe not all lines are meant to be protected. When the final gavel dropped, no one stood. There was no celebration, only the kind of silence that follows a verdict and precedes a new beginning. And Jasmine. She stood up last, alone. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a bang. Sometimes it walks in quietly through a side door, wearing heels and holding nothing but truth. What does it mean when silence wins the vote and still echoes louder than any voice in the room? The storm had passed, at least for now. Dallas was quiet that evening, the kind of stillness that follows a battle well fought. Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her living room. Lights dimmed a mug of untouched tea cooling on the side table. Outside the window, the Texas sun dipped low, casting long orange streaks across her neighborhood, calm, ordinary, unbothered. But inside, the air still buzzed with memory. A knock at the door. She opened it to find a courier holding a plain white envelope. No return address, only her name, handwritten in a child's looping scrawl. Jasmine thanked him, closed the door, and walked back to the couch, fingers tracing the torn edges as if expecting it to vanish before she could read it. Then she unfolded the paper, slowly, breath caught in her throat. The letter was from an 11-year-old girl in Illinois. No phone number, no politics, just pencil on paper. When I grow up, it read, I want to be a problem too. Jasmine stared at the words. No tears, no speeches. Just a slow, knowing smile, the kind that says everything without saying a word. She stood across the room and placed the letter by her window, where the fading sunlight touched its edges like a signature from the sky. Behind her, the TV played a muted news segment, headlines flashing about investigations, indictments, and votes that shocked a nation. But Jasmine didn't turn around. She watched the sky instead, watched it burn gold and violet like history being rewritten above a quiet Dallas street. Sometimes being a problem means refusing to sit down. Sometimes it means standing so still that power finally has to listen. And sometimes being a problem means becoming the answer no one dared imagine. The screen fades to black. But before it does, her voice cuts through. Will you speak up or stay quiet? Sometimes being called a problem simply means you dared to ask the right question at the exact moment someone wanted it buried. Silence may feel safer, but too often silence is the real danger. If there's one legacy worth leaving behind, it's the courage to never sit quietly. Have you ever stayed silent when the truth needed your voice? If this story shook something in you, don't scroll past it. Like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Truth Stories, where the loudest power is spoken in quiet defiance. Tap the bell, because the next story might not just challenge what you believe, it might change how you see yourself. What moment made you pause? Made you feel? Tell us in the comments, because silence isn't strength until it's broken. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. Truth doesn't end. It waits patiently for someone brave enough to listen. Maybe that someone is you.